Hello and welcome. This is Heavy Business, and I'm Aaliyah.
I'm Curtis.
And today we have on series regular Ian Chainey from Stereogum. Thank you so much for coming on, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be back. Always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure to have you and get your insights on the music scene today. So today we are going to dive into a number of different topics, current events, and um, developments in the music scene. First of all, being I'm curious your take on the Bandcamp situation, Ian, because I know that that's where you find a lot of artists. So Bandcamp has been sold. Can you? I don't remember who were they sold to?
They haven't completed the deal yet. The plan is to flip the company from Epic Games over to Song Trader.
Right, right. Okay. So what do you think that means for the ecosystem of Bandcamp?
I think it's too early to tell what the effects are going to be on the ecosystem. I think the worst case scenario is that we lose a lot of the talented writers over at daily.bandcamp.com. And that was one of the great hubs for A, exposing music, and B, like running fantastic radio shows like the heavy metal radio show that Brad Sanders done there. And I think that's the fear, is it's kind of losing that part of the ecosystem. And it was such a great place for freelancers to go find work and cut their teeth and do interesting and exciting work. And we would be in a lot poorer if that's going to be the case. But again, I think it's too soon to tell what's going to be happening when Song Trader eventually takes over. But as we're reading the tea leaves right now, it's hard not to take on a doomerist point of view with all that, especially with everything else that's been happening in publishing lately.
My own
Right.
opinion is that people
Yeah.
should be getting a big cartel or some sort of website shop as a backup if they don't have one, because a lot of bands only do Bandcamp right now. So
Well,
my own opinion.
why do we have to do that before? Like, if nothing happens, and like we don't need to do it.
Well, this is my own opinion, granted here. Like my own opinion is like if you can get something set up for yourself, it's always a good thing, just in case something else goes down. That's just my own opinion. It's like the reason why I have 5 different social media accounts. I assume that's the same reason why you guys do, plus have an email list and all the rest of it. Because if one goes down, you still got the 4 other to keep in touch with people and sell our wares, so to speak. So that's my own opinion. Even if you don't need it, I think it's a smart move. I don't know how you two feel about it, but I personally would figure out a way of selling my physical product on top of everything else if I'm only depending upon Bandcamp personally.
Curtis needs to have that second Twitter for all his not safe for work stuff. So it's a lot of pictures, he's got the OnlyFans going.
You need an OnlyFans. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, you got to diversify, obviously.
You got it.
Yeah.
What were you saying about the news with what's changing with music publishing that's troublesome?
I think just publishing in general, we're losing a lot of websites to this kind of venture capitalist structure where everyone's coming into publishing thinking is going to make money. Obviously, publishing isn't geared up to make the kind of money that IT companies want them to make, and so you see a lot of turnover, a lot of layoffs, and you see what's happening with Gawker, the Gawker empire currently, such as like Deadspin, Jezebel, and all those sites where they're moving towards using AI instead of paying writers and so on and so forth. And it just seems like the entire universe of being able to get out there and publish stuff is continually shrinking, and it's unfortunate. You know, I think of the death of the alt weekly back in the 2000s, and now it seems like this is being repeated with all of these websites that used to be good outlets for people to learn how to write, and it's just too bad.
That sucks. I can't believe that they're doing. I mean, I can believe that they're doing that, but like, so they're actually having AI write articles instead of people.
Oh yeah, that was a
Is that
big
what you're saying?
thing. Yeah, they started rolling that out with the AV Club recently, where AI was writing these SEO optimized articles on like here's the 100 best movies that IMDb has ranked and so on and so forth. Just really empty content to try and fill it out and wring whatever they can out of the advertising bucks without paying anybody to actually write the material.
Well, that's
That's
dark.
depressing.
Um, well, I don't know where how to transition from that. But I think that I hope that like people will be able to tell like the authenticity and will actually be able to distinguish quality human content. And I mean, you see the same issue with art, and you see the same thing. The same thing could be coming from music too, um, which is just it's super troubling because the whole purpose of art almost isn't just for the consumer; it's for the creator. You know, like people create because they need to create. It's therapy. It's important, and then sharing that experience with other people is important as well. Sharing your music with other people is like a way of sharing your journey with other people, and it's like a community experience. So I hope that doesn't get taken away from us. I don't know.
I would imagine, just as my own viewpoint on this, is I don't think it'll go too far, because like people always want that human element behind the art, like you're saying about how they, I can't imagine a computer being able to successfully do that all the time, but it's my own 2 cents.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like the parasocial relationship that people have with artists. That Ian, in the article that you sent me earlier this week, they mentioned that being a contributing factor and why it's been a problem. So we can dive into this. Ian, can you talk about maybe introduce this article that you sent to me earlier this week about the rotating group and the Bitcoin blockchain fan voting to change the members of the group and things, this K-pop model?
Sure. Yeah, there was this great article that went up on Defector last couple months back in August, titled "Triple S and the Rise of K-pop Girls Crypto Capitalism," and it was an interesting look into how the K-pop model might be spread throughout the rest of music. And the idea is that, as you said, there is such a strong parasocial relationship with a lot of the idol groups in K-pop right now, where the idea is not just to listen to the music, but also to engage fully with how the groups are structured, to buy all their merch, and so on and so forth. So these artists just aren't, regular music artists. It almost becomes like a lifestyle brand. And there's some fear on how that would infiltrate the rest of music, because it's like, is this what we want out of art at the end of the day? Is to have this wild, end stage capitalism in infecting music. At least that's my takeaway from it. I don't know. What was your takeaway from it?
Well, um, first of all, I don't think that that's quite going to happen with metal because the metal is so based on the authenticity of individual experience, and it's also so like kind of old school, like it doesn't change with the times as much or as quickly. But the way that I am kind of seeing this fan like trying to basically the thing that stuck out to me from the article was the idea of making the fans the producers of the band, or making them feel like they're the producers by voting on, specifically in this example they were saying that fans could vote on like the competing members and they would choose who would join the group basically, ultimately. And while I don't think that would ever kind of manifest itself necessarily, I suppose it could, but what I do see happening is people using Patreon and maybe they will put up 2 versions of a song and ask their fans to vote on which one they like better. Or they'll ask for their fans' input on the song, and they might actually take it to heart and make changes to their music based off of what their fans say. Curtis, what do you think? Curtis,
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. I am very sorry. Technical difficulties tonight.
based
Holy
off of
shit.
what we're saying, what are you taking away from this topic?
I think what you're saying would make sense, to be perfectly honest. To a degree, I think some people are already doing that as artists.
Yes,
the
that's what I
Patreon.
said. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, with the Patreon anyway. So could that like really be rolled out in the future? For sure. I don't really have anything to add. I mean, you said that perfectly, Aaliyah. I don't know what else to say on that part. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize.
But one thing I do want to talk about just really quickly, just in regards to that, if I may, just like I think part of the thing with what you guys are discussing with the K-pop thing, unless my takeaway is totally different than what you guys are taking away from it, is like having too much of like where the product is being dictated to the consumer, like as in the music, right? And I can see that being a concern. But at the same time, I get it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I understand the model, but at the same time, I'm kind of like it could work, but I do understand your concerns at the same time.
I guess I'll pose a question to both of you, but
Sure.
is there any lingering fear that everything in culture is being sportified in a way that is kind of like detrimental to both discourse and how arts in the pure sense is supposed to take hold in culture? Where I think of the big shift that's been happening in sports fandom over the past 10 to 20 years has been switching allegiances from the players to being fans of like what the franchise does and what the GMs do, and being like, oh man, that was a great contract that we signed that person to. And it's just like how cynical fandom has become in that regard. Like, do you see any of that rubbing off into music? And is
Well,
that any long-term concern?
Well, that's always kind of been the case, though, hasn't it? Because if you're like what you're talking, I'm not a big sports guy, so maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, and it's very well possible. I mean, people do that with labels all the time, where they're just fans of a label, or at least it used to be like in the '90s and shit when we were growing up. It was like people had, like Earache had their certain fans, Roadrunner had their certain fans. People would buy anything from the label, and even still that happens, right? So I don't know. I think that does happen to a degree, unless I'm totally misunderstanding what you're saying.
But I
Illy,
don't.
have you seen any shift in that type of fandom since over the past 10 years? Like going from the music to thinking more of like all this stuff in like a strictly business aspect?
Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question, because
Maybe me too.
what I would say is that I feel like the social relationship between the fans and the members of bands is increasing due to social media and all of that. And therefore people do have allegiances to individual people more than to bands sometimes,
Well,
because
bands
of their
and
personal
labels.
connections.
Well,
Hmm?
bands and labels, but sometimes
Yeah.
they don't, because it kind of, I think it depends upon the genre, though.
Maybe. But I mean,
But
yeah, if people might develop what they feel is a personal connection with a certain singer, and then if that singer gets kicked out of a band unceremoniously, they might not like the band anymore.
true, but at the same time, I mean, there is, I think again, it comes back to the style. Like I don't know if black metal fans are necessarily, their allegiances to like a certain singer or guitarist or something like that
Really?
all the time. I don't think
I think
so.
so. I think
Really?
so,
Okay, I
100.
don't think
Yeah.
Ian's the
Especially
black metal guy. He would know
well,
better than
especially
either one of us.
with
But
how many one-person projects there are out there. And then anything that
well, I'm talking
person
about
does
bands. I'm talking about bands.
anything that person does will become like they'd be interested in anything that person does. Like I see that a lot, regardless of genre of music. People will develop an affinity for a specific musician, and then anything they do, they follow that.
That seems less to me nowadays. That seems less to me.
Well, I'm not old like you, so maybe
Oh, burn!
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
Wow.
maybe I haven't
Jesus
seen it
Christ.
change for the negative.
Not
It's a
old like
see
me.
and or I'm too old and I don't see it in my friends. I think that
Hmm.
like and maybe I'm being too like introspective about it because that's
Hmm.
kind of how I operate. But I do see that I would say in like my scene, like
Oh, power metal,
and
yeah.
power metal and melodic metal, melodic death metal, like those genres, I feel like that's definitely a thing.
Okay, fair. I could see that because you got like the Tobias Sammet people, and you got like the I forget the guy from Nightwish's name.
Thomas
Uh,
Holopainen.
thank you. And you got like
How dare
all
you?
sorts of the blanked. Hey, you just called me old, so I have to dig back here. I don't know where I was going with this. Ian, did we answer your question?
Well, and then there's like the Nightwish Tarja fans, and then like
Yeah.
all the different vocalists, like people that are very strongly opinionated in one way or another. Um, but anyway, was that your question? Am I actually answering your question, Ian?
Yeah, I think so. We can also parlay this into talking about the article that you sent out about Madison Beer, Olivia Rodrigo, and It Factor. Uh, to get us to that track, I guess my follow-up question here would be, how does your fandom change if you are a fan of albums versus being a fan of bands?
Ooh.
How does the fandom change? Hmm. Well, I mean, the fandom, that's an interesting, it's an interesting thought because I do think that there are a lot of people that don't even realize that they're fans of albums and not the band. Because what will happen is a band will put out an album that doesn't fit the mold of the last album, and people will be upset that they changed. But the people who are fans of the band will like it regardless because they will like it if it's different, regardless of whether it's different or not, because they love the band and there's like a vibe about the band that they like. So I think I think that fans of bands maybe have a deeper connection to the music or not to the music though in general. It's just like a different connection, I think.
I think it depends because like you could really love a certain album but not be a total fan of the band,
Yeah,
right?
true.
Like I really like River Runs Red by Life of Agony is probably one of my favorite albums of all time, but I can't really say I'm a big fan of the rest of Life of Agony's discography. I like it, but it's not like I can't say I really have really listened to anything by Life of Agony much in the last 10 years other than River Runs Red. So does that mean I'm not as big of a fan?
I don't know, and I think that this is actually far more common in metal than it is in pop music because I think that generally people who are obsessed with Taylor Swift are just obsessed with Taylor Swift. Like they don't care what the different albums sound like. Everything she touches turns to gold. And like whereas with a metal, I see it a lot where people are like, "Oh, I like their first couple albums, but then after that, no, they sold out. I hate them." Or whatever. Or I liked this one album, but I don't like where they went from there. And I experienced that myself too. Um, with bands where I feel like I just don't connect with their music anymore after X album or whatever. I'm not sure. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thought exercise because how does it change the more toxic elements of being a fan of something if you only are a fan of the material produced as apart from the personalities behind that material, you know? Like, do you still get upset if a band releases a clunker or not, or does it matter? You know, like
Well,
I haven't cared about Suffocation for a long time, but I think Suffocation's Pierce from Within is one of the finest death metal albums ever. Like, I'm a
there you
fan
go.
of that album. And so the fact that I'm not a fan of the band, but a fan of that album kind of like alleviates some of the band baggage I would have regarding that stuff because I'm not like at Suffocation's throat being like, how can you just not release another album like Pierce from Within? It's like I got my Pierce from Within. Due to the eternalism in music, it's gonna last forever. It's always going to be there for me. It's never changing. It still rules. My relationship deepens with it. Is that a healthier relationship than just me being a fan of the band?
I I think it's I think it is healthier. I'm gonna make a bold statement and say I think it is healthier to have that relationship with it because it's true that, I would say that as I've gotten older, I've kind of lost the understanding for this idea of, well, how dare you not release a new album that's gonna scratch this itch that I have, that's gonna be exactly the same feeling as this other album when the other album exists. Like, why don't you just listen to the other album? It's kind of like this need for novelty at the same time as wanting sameness that I don't think is personally, I don't think that that's healthy. I think that's like perhaps a manifestation of the constant um, stimulus that we're exposed to now. But then again, these people existed before all of that. There were always people that were connected to that were fans like that, right? Like they didn't like they would hate the new album and feel like the band betrayed their fans by putting out a shitty album or whatever. So maybe it's not. I just talked myself out of it.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, the dichotomy of an artist is like, the artist doesn't necessarily owe fans anything. But then again, on the flip side, the artist kind of owes fans everything.
Right. It's a dichotomy. It's this eternal paradox. But the thing that I think what artists owe the fans is to be authentic. And if creating an album that the fans if the creating an album that the fans want is going to force you to compromise yourself as an artist, I think that's where you kind of lose it. And I'm not saying like it kind of depends on your model that you follow as a band. If you're a more commercial band and you're more like, I'm doing this because this is my career and I don't really care if the music is a perfect expression of my artistic, deep-seated soul and all of that, I guess then it's different. Maybe you could just function based purely on what the fans want in that case.
Well, let me ask you this. I have a question on that then. So how do you explain bands like Metallica and Flames who change their sound drastically, get a different fan base, and then go back to the same sound, earlier sound?
What do you mean? How do I explain it?
Well, because you're what in my the way I was kind of understanding that you were saying is that's kind of like not being true to themselves if they do something like that, if they change the model, unless I misunderstood what you were saying.
I'm really more saying like the motivations, right? Like
Okay,
it
fair
depends
enough.
on what your motivations are. And if you're,
Fair.
and like if doing something to like expose yourself to a new fan base is, it forces you to compromise your
Yeah.
artistic integrity, then that's
I guess
different than if you want to take a little detour and try a different style and see what happens.
I guess that's the key question is the integrity there or not?
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the key question.
Yeah. Fair enough.
That's
Fair enough.
interesting. Yeah, my friend's got a theory that there's only so many bands in metal that have the leeway to be able to release bad albums. Where Iron Maiden can release whatever they want. They're always going to sell out that tour. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
But Judas Priest doesn't have the same luxury. Like the Judas Priest album has to be good. It has to engage with fans. And I'm just kind of interested in what your two thoughts are on that. Where how do you are you able to escape that ever? And, like, does metal even have more Iron Maidens in us? Iron Maidens and Metallica? Or, like, what can other bands do in that case? Like, does there always have to be this fear that the next album has to be the greatest one that you've ever released?
I don't think I don't really think you can escape it now.
Agree.
I think that the nature of the way the world is, I don't think that there are bands that come out now that are gonna be able to, like, escape that, but, I mean, what the hell do I know about that? I haven't I'm not in Metallica or Iron Maiden, or I don't know anything about that, like, that kind of requires, like, such deep philosophical thought about, well, why are those bands, able to do that, and how do you get to that point? And is that even a goal for most artists? I don't even think that it's a realistic goal to have as an independent or an underground band to try to escape that. I think that you should always try to have your next album be your best work. I don't think it should be based off of fear though. I think it should just be based off of a desire to create the best thing that you can and the desire to live up to your potential.
Which Iron Maiden usually do. They have been since their reunion. Their last couple weren't as good as the first ones that they did post reunion, but I mean they are still doing as their best some of their best material, I personally think. So that makes sense.
The other interesting side of this that I was thinking of recently is if the only thing that is under a band's control is how sick your riffs are, do they even need to concern themselves with any of this thought about having an it factor or, you know, putting themselves out there on social media in fun and interesting ways? Does any of that matter? And if it does matter, is that just a consequence of like no label having an A&R department anymore?
I think it does matter, and I don't know the situation with A&R departments in labels. So I don't know what you're talking about. I thought that labels still had A&R. Do you mean they don't actually develop artists like they used to?
Yeah, I mean, like A&R is like an extinct thing these days. And all of it kind of like falls back in the artist to make sure that the artist is the one as doing their own A&R. That's been one of the big complaints I've been hearing from pop stars recently is just like, like I'm a musician. What I do is music. I shouldn't have to be thinking about what TikTok videos I should be making every day. Like that should be something that a label used to take care of back in the day, and it shouldn't be handed off on me. Like I should only be concerned with making music. And so forcing artists to have this like 360 view of their own uh of doing their own PR for themselves is like where does that put us? And does that take away from, their what they're naturally good at, which is making music?
It definitely does, and I mean, it's like the only reason that I'm able to do all the business stuff for my band is because I'm not a creative member in the band. I don't write the music, I don't write the lyrics, so I'm able to spend all my energy on the business side of things. But like, it's so draining. And it was interesting because we were talking to Kragan for the last episode, and he was mentioning all these things that like, oh, there's social media managers, and then there's the booking agent, and then there's the band manager, and then there's this department at the record label and this department at the record label. And I'm like, oh shit, I'm doing all of that stuff. Like literally 5 people's work. I'm doing all of that. And it's exhausting. And it is, I think, we're trying to as artists, we're all trying to keep up as best as we can, but yeah, it's draining for sure. And I think that if you don't have people in your band who can do that for you, then you're really um up shit creek without a paddle, you know. And you really have to find somebody that's passionate about your music who's willing to do that side of things for you, or you have to be willing to take on those hats yourself to some degree. And that is just the way that things are. And I'm not saying that it's good, but it is the way things are. And so, like, can you avoid it? Can you avoid doing those things and still be able to do what you love? I don't even think that you can. It's kind of a catch-22, because if what you love is creating high quality music, that costs money. And so how are you going to do that with the limited amount of time that you have in life as a human being? You got to sleep a little bit, and you got to make your money to pay your bills a little bit. So, and it's a tough situation that we're in right now.
Do you think that music is still the most important part of the equation these days?
I don't always, because there's so many acts out there where the music isn't necessarily quote unquote high quality, and you can tell, but it struck a nerve either because of the artist connected with the fan base or something else just hit. I mean, I don't think it necessarily is. Like, we got TikTok videos where Little Nas blew up a couple of years ago just from TikTok.
That was a great
And
song, though.
well, it was, but at the same time, it wasn't even his song. That was like it was taken from Nine Inch Nails, right? So I don't know why I gave that as an example, but like, it wasn't even his music, and it still blew up, and he blew up, and all the rest of it. So I don't think it's necessarily the most important part.
I'm thinking of Old Town Road, or you
Yeah,
talking
Old
about
Town
something
Road.
else?
No, Old Town Road, because that was taken from Nine Inch Nails. So the sample was actually, it was from Nine Inch Nails. Trent Reznor actually won a Grammy due to that.
Oh, the sample. Okay, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
the little part, that part right there. So where was I going with this before? Yeah, not necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily a key point, personally, necessarily.
Yeah, I almost feel like who matters more. But you can only achieve so much success through
100%.
that if your musical quality isn't exceptional. You kind of have to have everything to really get to the point of great success. Oh.
Well, here's one point I want to make right here, though, is that, like, I think in a lot of cases it is the personality involved with the band more so than the talent. That's my own opinion. Like, there are bands where the uh
So
certain individuals connect.
what I'm saying is that you can be a super, super talented artist, unbelievably talented, and making incredible music, and nobody will listen to you unless you have the right connections and you can be heard.
Yeah.
But what I'm also saying is that even if you have the outlets to be heard, you'll only be so successful if you're not truly exceptional.
Of course. Yeah. Everybody knows those bands that got signed because they had a buddy that was in the A&R department or worked as a product manager or something like that. And they don't get that far. They don't.
So I guess to tie this all together, in our sphere of metal, does it factor matter?
Yes. I think it does to a large degree, personally. Good examples. Well, there's all sorts of good examples out there, but I mean, like, Electric Callboy is a good example of the it factor right there. I mean, they got silly music. It's catchy music, but it's silly. It's not deep music. It's not. It's stupid music, but it's fun. It's catchy, but it's they got an it factor right there. It just is what it is, and there's plenty of bands like that where it's not necessarily the greatest artistic statement of the century, but they have an it factor. Another good example is, people are probably going to hate me for saying this. I know Ian's going to hate me for saying this. Is Lorna Shore. They are a good band. They're a very good band, but I don't personally think that they are necessarily better than a lot of other deathcore bands out there. But they are extremely good. But Will has an it factor, and they took off after he came along. He's a very charismatic individual. People like him, and I don't think that band would have taken off if he hadn't been there. There's lots of examples. Tobias Sammet's another example of this. There's all. I think the it factor is a thing personally.
So if it factor is important, is that something that you can cultivate?
Well,
Or is it just inherent?
this
Is
is
it
an
just
Aaliyah
inherent to the
question.
person? Yeah.
I'm going to make Aaliyah answer this one.
I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that because I haven't figured out. I I don't know if you can because you can't define it factor. That's why it's called the it factor. You don't know what all goes into it. It's not just charisma. It's not like just these specific recipe ingredients that you can put together and suddenly you have the it factor. I think maybe there are things that you can do to become more that way, but I do think some of it is just you have it or you don't.
I think this is true because look at Ronnie Radke. He has the it factor and everybody fucking hates his guts. He's a great example. He fills out fucking stadiums. He's probably one of the most hated people in the industry, and he's making probably more money than anybody else. He's got more hits than anybody. So
Yeah. What do you think, Ian?
Well, I mean, it's tough because I think it's so far out of your control that's not something that's worth worrying about. I think again, at the end of the day, the only thing that you can really concern yourself with is the quality of the music and the sickness of your riffs. So as long as the riffs are sick and the music is really good, I think I think you're gonna win out eventually. It might take longer for some, but I think cream is always gonna rise. But again, as a fan of music and a writer, I'm always gonna be the one that says that because I always think that music is gonna be the most important part of the equation. My question is when you encounter a new artist from a PR perspective and you notice that they have the it factor, what does that conversation entail? Is it just kind of you got to do this because you have this? And do you steer them in specific directions in order to kind of help them get that personality out?
we generally don't ourselves. Like with the PR aspect, it's a little bit different than trying to steer people. Like usually, if a band comes to us, they have their own idea of how they want to be presented, and what we have to do at that point is we have to make sure that's conveyed to the journalists, right? So I guess to a degree, yes, we do steer it somewhat, but we have to try to keep it in line with the artist's vision without trying to veer off of that, if that makes sense.
Has there ever been a time where you've encountered an artist and they want to project a serious culty black metal image, but they're the funniest people ever, and it's just you just got to tell jokes in these interviews?
We haven't had it quite like that, but we have had it where the band wanted to cultivate a certain image, and we thought it was stupid. But what we did is we wouldn't take them because you just can't, because you can't win that. So if the band for example, I actually had a band that wanted to be positioned in front of more urban and rap oriented type I'm not joking, magazines, but they were basically like a deathcore band. And I was like, you want to be in double XL magazine and you want to be put in hip hop things, but you're a deathcore band. And I thought it was a joke at first, but they were deadly serious. And they said, well, we think we can cross over. I'm like, well, we're not the fucking people to talk to for this because this is just stupid. I'm not presenting a deathcore band to fucking rap magazines, and we don't handle rap magazines anyway.
Well,
So
what they should have done is gone to rap
well, they
publisher.
should have, but they weren't even rap. This is the point.
Well, but if they want to do a crossover,
yeah,
I think what
exactly.
they need to do is go to somebody that has the contacts that they want specifically.
I agree.
They're going to be the expert on how to position them in front of that audience.
My hat's off if they ever did that. I don't think they did, but anyways, that's my first example I can give you.
It's are you asking, do we ever do A&R and tell people what they should do? Oh, you should do a TikTok on this, or you should do more photos of this band member, but you should post more often on social media, things like that?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious if there's ever been an instance where you notice that somebody has the it factor, but they're just projecting it in the wrong way.
Well,
Or they're
again,
projecting in a way that's not conducive to how best to sell their band.
well, if we do notice it, we do say something, but it's again, it comes down to how far can we really steer the artist, if you know what I mean. for example, like let's say Aaliyah wanted some advice on how to do something like that. I'm just saying, I know you wouldn't, Aaliyah, but like let's say she asked me or Corinne for advice on how to do something. We would say that, but we wouldn't try to do it in such a way that it stifled what Shield of Wings was trying to do, because they have their own vision of what they want to do. So if she asked for advice, for example, we would say, well, we think you should do this. But if she went like, well, that's stupid, doesn't fall in line with what we want to do, fair enough. I'm not going to fight it because they're the artist, right?
But how about this from the other side? Like, have you ever noticed that people in the press have like so wholly misinterpreted what a band's it factor is that like you do not know how they made that jump to their conclusion?
It has happened. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I know it has happened. Not necessarily with an it factor, but more with like where we figured that a band would resonate with a certain type of fan of a genre, but it actually resonated with a totally different genre instead. Like we've had it before, like, you know, where a thrash band might more resonate with the death metal crowd just because they have more growled vocals, for example, but we tag them as thrash, or a death metal band resonating more with again thrash, for example, or a doom metal band resonating more the different genre. It happens, right? But I don't know quite if it's happened quite with an it factor, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I had another question for you, and my COVID brain just decided to absolutely delete it.
Damn.
Yeah, I guess what my questions are leading to here is like because there's so many variables in place when it comes to it factor. And I don't mean to circle back around to this again, but as an artist, is this even worth worrying about?
I don't think so personally, because again, like Aaliyah said, the it factor is kind of undefinable. So you either kind of have it or you don't have it. The best thing you can really do is just cultivate your own image and branding as best as you possibly can. And if you do have someone special in the band that does have that it factor, that's all the better. But I don't think you can necessarily cultivate an it factor. I personally don't. Like but there are artists that have it. Like Blackbeard's a really good example. He has it.
But
I mean,
I think like what you just said though is important. Like you have to keep your eyes open
yeah,
for it. So I do think you need to think about it. Even though you can't manufacture it, you
you
have to
can't.
be
Yeah,
aware of it.
100%.
And you also need to be aware of your branding and your positioning, as it were. You know, one of the things that was mentioned in that article was like talking about how each of these other figures has like a very specific image that's like they're almost a representation of an archetype. And this other person is just more generic. Like
Yeah.
finding your archetype and centering your branding around that, your imagery and all of that, and the way that you present yourself, I think is important.
Agree.
Who in your both your minds are the bands that have the best it factor currently? And what does that entail? Is it being good on social media? Is it being a good interview? Is it doing
Uh,
good videos?
Again, it's hard to define, but again, I'm gonna go back to Ronnie Radke, and everybody's gonna fucking hate me for saying this because I mean I think he's probably the closest thing to the it factor that there can be, just because everybody hates him, but he still manages to come out on top with the music. He's done so many stupid things. I think he went to prison, if I'm not mistaken, for something stupid, and he's still going strong. I think he got fired from a band, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, you can't really define it, but I personally think that he's and everybody's gonna hate me for saying it, but I'm saying it.
Well, I mean, other than the bands that you've already mentioned, Curtis, perhaps would be a better question because you
Okay,
did
well,
mention a few
I did mention a
earlier,
few. I
and
did
that
mention a
was
few.
one thing that you mentioned. Um,
And Bad Omens is another one that I think has an it factor too. Spirit Box.
Yeah, Spirit Box, I think it really does. And I think Archspire
Oh yeah.
has some of that it factor as well. They have such a specific, like, it's hard to articulate what they represent, but they do represent something so specific. It's like, because they're comedians, they're exceptional musicians, and like it's got that kind of magic to it, you know. I think Archspire, um, I think Slaughter to Prevail, there's
100%.
something. Alex Terrible has something that a lot of people like. He makes a lot of people go crazy. So
Chris Fronzak's another one, as much as everybody hates him too.
How do you feel about Chat Pile?
I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I don't really I see how they've taken off, and I get what people see, but I don't get it at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. Those I'm just thinking like those guys are so funny on social media.
Oh, they are, for
Yeah.
100%.
And I guess another thing that could fit into this, there was this big kerfuffle a few weeks ago about Two Mold being on the cover of Decibel in t-shirts. Like, how does that all play into this? Obviously,
Okay,
Two Mold has it factor because that band has blown up seriously, but does their sartorial choices matter so much in that regard?
okay. I want to say one thing about this, Ian. Just sorry, Leah. I just got to get this off my chest. I only saw two bad comments about that. I think it was a manufactured thing on the PR label side and Decibel side, and I think it was fucking brilliant because everybody and their dog came after those two guys and said something. But I literally only saw the two comments, and everybody went fucking insane. And I went, "That is brilliant." Two Mold probably got on like a zillion people's radars because of that. I know the Toronto show sold out. I was supposed to go to it, but I was fucking not able to. Um, anyways, I think it was a PR stunt that was masterfully played by Albert, and I think Emily was the other person that was on it. Somebody was on it, I don't remember, but and the band I think was masterful. Just got to get that off my chest.
yeah, well, and I think that I mean, we're talking about like, oh, our 10 commandments of band pictures. Don't wear band tees and shorts in your band photos. It's like it kind of only applies to certain genres. And I feel like death metal and thrash metal and like those more old school forms of metal, you can kind of get away with that. That's just being yourself. That's just being authentic. That's part of the culture um in those scenes. And so I think they were just being themselves. I don't, and that's probably actually is branding in a way.
So I think we can conclusively say that it factor also shifts by genre and style, right?
100%.
I mean, my question is like, which genres in metal are like the hardest to have that it factor? Is there because I think death metal is pretty low key, low maintenance, but I don't know. Does that obviously? I don't think that that same thing would hold true for like Euro style power metal.
Yeah, I think things like power metal and symphonic metal are those genres where every element has to be firing on all cylinders. Everything has to be great. Otherwise, people will notice a lot. Um, I think maybe even just anything that involves clean singing, primarily, maybe that's where it is because the voice of a band can really affect how people connect to the music so dramatically. And your riffs can be sick and all, but if your singer is kind of meh, people aren't going to like your music. They're not going to connect to it. Like as soon as they hear, they're not going to listen to that music. They'll be like, oh man, that band was really good, except the vocals kind of suck. So I'm not going to listen to it. I'll listen to this band that sounds really good and their singer's good. I think that might be the factor that makes it more difficult. But that's just my opinion.
What do you think, Curtis?
I think Aaliyah kind of summed it up pretty good, so I actually don't have anything to add this time. I'm sorry.
Yeah. What do you think is like the hardest metal genre to be replacement level in?
What do you mean replacement level?
Baseball has this theory of just a win above replacement, where an average player is like a 0, and then if you're above that, then you're better than an average player. It's kind of this way of rating different players. So when I say replacement level, just being like a generally competent band.
You mean like the musicians in the band, the replacement level?
I mean, just in general, like what?
Like good enough to be like a known name?
Yeah, yeah. Because I think there's some genres where it's easier to be replacement level than others. And my example for this would be technical thrash. It is like so hard to be a good, competent technical thrash band because you have to put so many hours in your instruments. You have to be a good singer. Like you're either like Watchtower or you're not. And the unfortunate thing with technical thrash is that like your audience, your potential audience is like 0. It's like one of the cruelest things in music. Like you got to put in your like 20,000 hours to be like a total killer guitarist, and like no one's gonna listen to your stuff. It's like one of the most masochistic pursuits in metal. So I'm kind of curious from like both of your perspectives. Like, is there any genre that you think that is very hard to break into right now?
Ooh, very hard to break into. Well, the only one genre that's really hard to break into, but it's not for the reasons why you're saying, right now is deathcore, because there's such a glut. There's like a huge fucking glut. Death metal seems to be slightly easier because I don't know, people will go listen to some, basement level fucking recording of death metal and think it's the greatest thing still and not really give a fuck. Deathcore seems to need better production and shit like that. But I think that's the reason why it's just because there's so many fucking bands out there right now. Other styles, power metal seems to be hard to break into, at least from my perspective. I don't know as much as Aaliyah does about the genre, but just from my outside viewpoint, it seems to be harder. But those are the two I can think off the top of my head.
I was going to say power metal and symphonic metal.
Symphonic too, yeah.
But I'm in that genre, so of course I'm going to be like, I have the hardest time. So,
but you guys also have a decent fan base at the same time.
We do.
Yeah.
And I think that the reason why it's difficult is because of that necessity for technical proficiency, high quality production, and like those two things. You have to spend a ton of time practicing, and you also have to have the money to put into the production side of things so that it actually sounds good, because otherwise it's not going to go anywhere. So I think there may be fewer genres where it isn't incredibly difficult, though, than for genres where it is incredibly difficult. Like
death metal is a lot easier to get into.
Death metal and black metal, I think, are probably the easier ones. But other than that, I think everything else is kind of hard. I don't know.
Or harder.
Yeah. Maybe Doom isn't
too
bad.
No, Doom isn't that hard to get into. Yeah, there's not hard to get into at all. Yeah. Stoner rock seems to be pretty easy for people to get into. It seems like everybody and their dog that fucking wants to do a stoner rock record can make a few sales. So
well, we're really running late actually, so we should probably wrap things up.
Fair. I didn't realize what time it was.
We did start late, but yeah. Ian, what do you have going on that you want to tell the people about before we wrap things up?
I mean, not much on my side. Just cruise by Stereogum the last weekday of the month to catch the black market. That's pretty much it on mine.
Right on.
Don't you have a newsletter too that people should sign up for? Ian?
Oh yeah, yeah. If you want to go to plaguerages.substack.com, you can read the newsletter that is severely late. I think we're about to get the all the good stuff that happened in June. I think I'm working on that one right now. So keep your eyes peeled for that one.
Right on. Well, anyone who's still listening at this point, thank you for listening. Let us know if you have any thoughts on these topics. This is a big, deep thinking episode. So I'm curious what everyone has to say about these things. And yeah, until next time, make like a bull and throw those horns up.